Hi there, welcome to my YouTube channel Dhyani classes. If you're watching my video for the first time, do subscribe my channel, hit the bell icon so that you get notified whenever new video will be uploaded. So in today's video, we will cover the second part of the chapter, Two Story About Flying, The Black Aeroplane, written by Frederick Forsyth from class 10th CBSE. So let's get started. Let's look at the second part of the chapter, The Black Aeroplane. The Black Aeroplane story is a very interesting story. It also has some amount of mystery in it. Now, this is a story about a pilot who was able to reach his home safely in the midst of a storm. So the lesson also teaches us about not losing hope at any point in time. So let's move on the chapter now. The moon was coming up in the east behind me and stars were shining in the clear sky above me. So here the narrator is saying that the moon was coming up in the east. That means the narrator was flying his aircraft in the night and the moon was rising up in the east behind me, and says stars were shining in the sky, or shining in the clear sky above me. So he saw the moon and the stars all around the sky, and at that time he was alone up in the sky, and says there wasn't a cloud in the sky. That means the sky was very clear with the moon and the stars, and there wasn't a cloud in the sky, and I was happy to be alone high up above the sleeping countryside. So the narrator was flying aircraft alone in the sky, and he was very happy to be alone in the sky because the sky was very clear with the stars all around, and says he was flying aircraft above the sleeping countryside. So what do you mean by sleeping countryside? That means the village side, and all people were sleeping at that time, and he was flying the aircraft alone in the sky. Further he says, I was flying my old Dakota aeroplane over France back to England. So here he is saying that he is talking about the model name of his aircraft, and it was an old Dakota aeroplane which he was flying over France back to England. That means he was going from France to England in the night all alone, and says I was dreaming of my holiday and looking forward to being with my family. So he was very happy and excited to meet his family, and he was dreaming of my holiday. That means he wanted to celebrate holidays with his family and enjoy with them. So that's why he was so happy and excited to meet his family, and says I looked at my watch on 30 in the morning. So later on he looked at his watch and he saw it was 1:30 in the morning. I should call Paris control soon, I thought. So as he was alone in the sky flying his old Dakota aeroplane over France back to England, and then a thought came to his mind that he should call Paris control soon. That means he thought he has to deliver his message to Paris control. So what do you mean by Paris controls here? That means a control room is a place, a big booth or an airport from which instructions are given to aircraft when they are taking off or landing, and this control room are responsible for controlling aircraft flying in the airspace. So in the same way, the narrator had to give some information to the Paris control room to know more about the landing of the aircraft at the airport, and says as I looked down past the nose of the airplane, I saw the lights of a big city in front of me. So when he thought I should call Paris control room, he looked down the nose of the airplane. That means he looked at the tip of the aeroplane and he saw the lights of a big city in front of him. So as he looked down from the aeroplane, he could see the big city and he could see the lights were shining all around the city in front of him, and says I switched on the radio and said Paris control Dakota DS088 here. So here he switched on the wireless radio and said Paris control Dakota DS088 here. That means he started delivering a message to the Paris control room. So Dakota 088 is the code he used for landing and taking off his plane. Can you hear me? I'm on my way to England, over. So he is asking them, can you hear me? And says I am on my way to England. That means he informed Paris control room that he is flying to England. So this was the message he wanted to give Paris control, and says the voice from the radio answered me immediately, DS088, I can hear you. So when he delivered his message through the wireless radio, he got an answer from the Paris control room that yes, we can hear you DS088, and gave him instruction that you ought to turn 12-degree west now, DS088 over. So he got a response from the control room, and the operator gave him instruction that he ought to turn 12-degree west now. That means he should turn 12-degree west, and then he disconnect the line by saying 88 DS088 over. Further, he says, I checked the map and the compass, switched over to my second and last fuel tank, and turned the Dakota 12-degree west towards England. So here he is saying that after getting instructions from the control room, I checked the map and the compass. That means immediately he looks at the map and then he looks at the compass as well to know more about his position and direction. So compass is a device used for checking the direction, and says switched over my second and last fuel tank. That means he had little fuel in it and it was the last fuel tank that he was switching over. And then look at the compass, he turned his Dakota aeroplane 12-degree towards the west as per the given instruction by the Paris control room, and says, I'll be in time for breakfast, I thought. So he thought he would be able to reach on time in London and would meet his family and have breakfast with them. So he was very happy while thinking about all this because he was so excited to see his family. A good big English breakfast. Everything was going well. It was an easy flight. So here he thought that he would enjoy a good big English breakfast. So what is good English breakfast? Good English breakfast is a meal that is eaten in the morning and consists of a lot of fried food, toast, eggs, meat, tea, coffee, and other soft drink as well. So he was very excited to meet his family and have a good big English breakfast with them, and says everything was going well. That means he was flying towards England in thinking that he will meet his family and have breakfast with them, and it was an easy flight. That means he did not face any challenges or difficulties during his journey towards England. So he was flying towards England without any difficulty, and says Paris was about 150 kilometers behind me when I saw the clouds. So as he was flying plane very easily and smoothly, and he had already moved on 50 kilometers from Paris towards London, but when he looked back for a moment, there was a cloud. That means he noticed some kind of clouds in the sky, and says storm clouds. They were huge. So he saw big storm clouds behind him, and they were looking very scary in the sky, and he felt that these huge clouds were going to make a big storm from behind him. So this is what he noticed when he saw behind for a moment while flying towards the London. They looked like a black mountains standing in front of me across the sky. So here he has seen huge and scary clouds, and it looked like a black mountains. That means clouds were very huge and black, and they were looking like a black mountains because clouds were becoming bigger and bigger and spreading all around, and says standing in front of me across the sky. That means black clouds were approaching towards him, and then they were in front of him and in front of his plane and across the sky as well, and says I knew I could not fly up and over them, and I did not have enough fuel to fly around them to the north or south. So seeing these monstrous clouds, he became very frightened and got confused because he knew I could not fly up and over them. That means he was not able to fly over the clouds because clouds were very huge, and says I did not have enough fuel to fly around them to the north or south. So why he couldn't fly over the clouds? Because he was running out of the fuel. That means he did not have enough fuel as he was using the last fuel tank, and he was not able to turn his plane towards north or south. So he got confused because he could not see anything in front of him, and clouds were forming like a mountain in front of him. Further he says, I ought to go back to Paris, I thought, but I wanted to get home. So here when he got confused about what to do, then he thought I ought to go back to Paris. That means I should go back to Paris because of the storm. And another thing is he was running out of the fuel, but suddenly he thought that I want to get home. So he decided to move on through the storm and wanted to meet his family anyhow, and wanted to go back to London because he wanted to meet his family, and says I wanted that breakfast. I'll take the risk. I thought, and flew that old Dakota straight into the storm. So finally, he decided to get home and meet his family because he wanted that breakfast with his family. So he wanted to enjoy that good English breakfast with his family, and says, "I'll take the risk." So that's the risk or risky decision he took when he was flying through the storm, and then he flew that old Dakota straight into the storm. That means he started flying straight towards the storm, but still he was not sure whether he will reach London or not, because in front of him storm was forming just like a mountain. But somehow he wanted to meet his family and have a good English breakfast with them. So in this way he took a dangerous risk to fly towards the storm, and then his plane started moving towards the storm, and says inside the clouds everything was suddenly black. So as soon as he entered inside the black scary clouds, everything was suddenly black. That means it was too dark when his plane entered inside the dark clouds, and everything was black all around him, and there was no light, and he could not see anything, but still his plane was moving forward. Further, he says it was impossible to see anything outside the aeroplane. So as we know that he took a dangerous risk to fly through the storm, and when he entered inside the black clouds, it was impossible to see anything outside the aeroplane. That means he wanted to see outside, but he could not see anything all around because of the dark clouds were there, and says the old aeroplane jumped and twisted in the air. So later on he felt that his old Dakota aeroplane was jumping little and twisted in the air. That means his plane was not moving at all, and as we know that it was the black cloud storm that he had entered, and so the plane was not steady at all, and it was jumping and twisting in the air. That means his plane turning left and right automatically, and it was just as if it was going to fall. And says, I looked at the compass, I couldn't believe my eyes, the compass was turning round and round and round. So when he understood his plane was moving in different directions, immediately he looked at his compass to know more about his current position, in which direction his plane was moving. But then he got surprised and says, I couldn't believe my eyes. The compass was turning round and round and round. So when he looked at the compass, something had happened, and it was unbelievable, and he saw his compass was just turning round and round and round automatically, and he couldn't understand what was happening with the compass. It was dead, it would not work. So now we got to know that the compass is not functioning well, and after many efforts it did not work, and it was dead. And then he exclaimed that it would not work. So he got frightened about how he would know which direction his aeroplane is flying, because he couldn't see anything forward, and says the other instruments were suddenly dead too. So he started finding other instruments, and whatever instruments were there he used for having contact with the Paris control room, but everything was dead, and he couldn't be able to contact the control room for the help. And says, I tried the radio, Paris control, can you hear me? So when he got to know that his all instruments is dead, then he tried another way for having contact with the control room, and it was his wireless radio. And then he picked up the radio and spoke out loud, Paris control, can you hear me? So he wanted to get some help from the control room, and says there was no answer, the radio was dead too. That means when he was approaching the control room, can you hear me, but then there was no answer. That means he didn't get any answer from the control room. That means nobody could hear him, and lost all the contact with the control room. And then he understood that his wireless radio is also dead. Further he says, I had no radio, no compass, and I could not say where I was. So here, as he was flying inside the black clouds and trying to contact the Paris control room, but nothing is working. That means the radio, compass and other instruments were not working at all, and he was not able to see anything where he was at that time. And says, I was lost in the storm. Then in the black clouds quite near me, I saw another aeroplane. So finally he understood that he was lost in the storm and felt as if his aeroplane is going to fall, but something strange had happened, and so he saw something in the black clouds near him, and it was another aeroplane. So it was so dark all around him, but suddenly he saw another aeroplane, and it was flying next to him inside the black clouds. And says it had no lights on its wings, but I could see it flying next to me through the storm. So he saw another aeroplane next to him and says that the aeroplane did not have lights on its wings, but he could see this aeroplane which was flying just next to him inside the storm. Further he says, I could see the pilot's face turned towards me. So here he is saying that he could also see the pilots of that second aeroplane, and he was turning towards me and saying, I was very glad to see another person. So he felt very happy because it was not only he who is caught in the storm. He saw one more aeroplane and there was a pilot also. So he felt very happy that he has company, and says he lifted one hand and waved, follow me, he was saying. So the other aeroplane, there was a pilot sitting inside and he was looking at him. So the fellow lifted his hand, and what did he tell this narrator? He told him, follow me, he knows that I am lost, I thought. So the narrator thought that that person or that aeroplane's pilot has understood that this fellow has lost his direction. So he is asking him to follow him. He is trying to help me. He turned his aeroplane slowly to the north in front of my Dakota so that it would be easier for me to follow him. So here the narrator is saying that he is trying to help me. So who's trying to help him? Another aeroplane pilot was trying to help him to take out from the storm, and saying he turned his aeroplane slowly to the north in front of my Dakota. That means this strange aeroplane's pilot has turned his aeroplane towards the north, and he was just in front of the narrator's aeroplane so that it would be easier for him to follow him. So this strange pilot was trying to help him at that time and waving his hand to follow him so that he could take out of the dark clouds. So still the narrator was facing danger because not knowing where his aeroplane was flying, and even he don't know this strange aeroplane as well, and says, I was very happy to go behind the strange aeroplane like an obedient child. So the narrator is caught inside the dark clouds and storm, but at the same time somebody was there to take him out of the danger, and says, I was very happy to go behind the strange aeroplane like an obedient child. That means he was simply following the instruction given by the strange or unknown pilot, just like an obedient child. So what do you mean by an obedient child? That means child who follows or is willing to do what the parents is told to do. Half an hour, the strange black aeroplane was still there in front of me in the clouds. So here he is saying that the strange pilot was flying his aeroplane in front of him inside the black clouds for half an hour and guiding him where to go or to follow him, and says now there was only enough fuel in the old Dakota's last tank to fly for 5 or 10 minutes more. So as he was following another strange aeroplane just like an obedient child which was flying just in front of him, and then he looked at the tank fuel level, and now he understood that aeroplane has only fuel for flying just for 5 or 10 minutes more. So it was a very difficult situation for him to, because he was using the second fuel tank, and even it was the last fuel tank which had only little bit of fuel. So he's saying that only little fuel is left for flying for 5 or 10 minutes more. Further he says, I was starting to feel frightened again. So here, after knowing that the level of fuel tank, he started feeling more frightened again, because aeroplane has only fuel for flying just for 5 or 10 minutes more, and he was thinking that if the fuel tank goes off, he will not be able to land and then aeroplane will crash for sure. So this increased his tension. He started to feel frightened again, and says, but then he started to go down and I followed through the storm. So later on, suddenly he noticed that his black aeroplane which narrator was following started going down and down through the storm. That means this strange aeroplane took him to the landing area of the airport or near the runway, and then he became very happy. And then suddenly I came out of the clouds and saw 2 long straight lines of the lights in front of me. So finally the narrator was able to come out from the dark and huge clouds, and he saw 2 long straight lines of lights in front of him. That means he saw a runway where he had to land his plane. It was a runway, an airport, I was safe. So when he saw 2 straight lines of the runway, he got to know that he has reached at the airport, and then he exclaimed it was a runway, and now he came out of the danger which he was facing and going to land safely, and says, I turned to look for my friend in the black aeroplane, but the sky was empty. So as he was so happy and excited that he has reached the runway, but suddenly he turned to look for my friend in the black aeroplane. That means he looked behind to see the black aeroplane that lead him to took him to this airport, and says, but the sky was empty. That means he wanted to say thank you to the black aeroplane's pilot, but he could not see the aeroplane behind him, and the sky was empty, and says there was nothing there. So he looked everywhere, looked around, looked up, but he could not see the black aeroplane, and says the black aeroplane was gone. I could not see it anywhere. So here the narrator is saying that finally he landed at the airport safely, and now he was no more panicked and frightened, and he understood that the strange aeroplane left him forever. Further he says, I landed and I was not sorry to walk away from the old Dakota near the control tower. So finally he landed at the airport safely, and he did not face any problem while landing, and he is saying that he landed at the airport and there was no trouble, and says he was not sorry to walk away. That means he was able to escape easily from the scary and dangerous storm and black clouds, and he was able to save his life. So later on he started going away from his old Dakota aircraft and moved towards the control tower, and says, I went and asked a woman in the control center where I was and who the other pilot was. So as soon as he landed, he approached toward the control room, and then he saw a woman sitting there and asked her, where is the place and where am I and where is the other pilot? Who was other pilot? So he was talking about the pilot who helped him when he was inside the dark clouds, and says, I wanted to say thank you. So he told the woman that he was looking for the other pilot because he wanted to thank you that pilot. She looked at him very strangely and then laughed. So here the narrator is saying that she looked at me very strangely. That means a woman gave him a very strange look and then laughed. So while looking at him strangely, he started looking at him because he asked her who was flying another aeroplane and wanted to thank him, and says, another aeroplane up there in the storm? No other aeroplanes were flying tonight. So while laughing, the woman asked him another aeroplane up in the storm. So she asked him, why are you asking for another aeroplane? And said there was no another aeroplane were flying in the sky tonight, and says yours was the only one I could see on the radar. So she told him that you are the only one who was flying the aeroplane, and there was no another aeroplane was flying, and said I could see on the radar. So she told him that even I could see on the radar that there was only one aeroplane was flying in the sky. So what do you mean by radar? Radar is a system that uses radio waves for finding the position of moving aeroplanes or ships, and used for tracking fighter jets and other aeroplanes, etc. So she was very sure that there was no aeroplane except his aircraft. Further he says, so who helped me to arrive there safely without a compass or a radio and without any more fuel in my tanks? So after getting the answer from a woman who was sitting inside the control room made him puzzled and confused, and then he started asking himself questions. Who was the pilot and who helped him when all the instruments were not working at all, and even when he was in a very dangerous situation, or when the fuel tank was running out of the fuel, and when he was in a very difficult situation, and says, who was the pilot on the strange black aeroplane flying in the storm without lights? So he was also thinking that who was the person or pilot on the strange black aeroplane flying in front of him, and says where is the black strange aeroplane which had no lights on its wing in front of him. So this lesson talks about the self-confidence and keeping hope. So the narrator had a strong determination that he would want to reach his family and have a good English breakfast with them, and he never decided to go back to Paris and wanted to reach his family anyhow, having good breakfast with them. So this is the end of the chapter. I hope you like the video. For more informative videos, do subscribe my channel, hit the bell icon so that you get notified whenever new video will be uploaded. So thank you so much for watching once again. Stay safe, stay healthy.